Hey all, you know how sometimes history feels like it's just repeating itself? Well, strap in, because we're diving into one of those moments with a law that's older than America's love for deep-fried everything, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. This thing lets the president basically say, "You're out of here," to any non-citizen from a country we're at war with. Sounds intense, right? Now you might be thinking 1798? That's like when people thought powdered wigs were a good look. And you'd be right, but here's the kicker. This law is still on the books. It's like finding your great-great-grandpappy's musket in the attic. It might seem like a relic, but it could still fire. And trust me, the Alien Enemies Act has been used more recently than you might think. This isn't just some dusty old law. It's a reminder of how easily fear and prejudice can be used to justify stripping away people's rights. And that, my friends, is something that should concern us all. So, buckle up as we unpack this historical hand-me-down. We'll look at how it's been used and abused over the years, why it's so controversial, and what it tells us about America's complicated relationship with immigration. Because, let's be honest, when it comes to immigration, America's track record is about as spotless as a toddler after a juice box bender. Fast forward to 2017. Remember when Donald Trump was throwing around ideas like they were confetti at a ticker tape parade? One of those ideas involved dusting off the Alien Enemies Act. He wanted to use it for mass deportations, specifically targeting folks from Muslim-majority countries. Now, Trump wasn't exactly known for his nuanced approach to, well, anything. But even for him, this was a doozy. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole using a sledgehammer made of fear-mongering. The backlash was about as subtle as a glitter bomb in a library. People pointed out the obvious. Using this law in this way would basically be like saying, "Welcome to America," unless you're from a certain part of the world, in which case get out. It was discriminatory, it was un-American, and it reeked of the same kind of xenophobia that makes you want to take a shower after riding public transportation. Thankfully, cooler heads and, the Constitution prevailed, and the Alien Enemies Act stayed on the shelf. But the fact that it was even considered is a stark reminder that some of America's worst impulses are still alive and kicking. To understand this whole Alien Enemies Act thing, we need to hop in our time machine and zoom back to the late 18th century. Picture this, America, a brand spanking new country, is still figuring out this whole democracy thing. They're having a little political spat with France known as the Quasi-War, because even war names were fancy back then. Enter the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, a four-part legislative cocktail that was about as welcome as a skunk at a picnic. These laws were basically the government's way of saying we're in charge, and if you disagree, you can just shut your face, or leave. The Alien Enemies Act was just one part of this delightful package. It basically said that if America went to war with your home country, the president could kick you out or lock you up, no questions asked. And by no questions asked, I mean no due process, no fair trial, no nothing. It was basically the legal equivalent of getting dumped by text message. Now, the government's official line was that these laws were all about protecting national security. But let's be real, they were really about silencing critics of then-President John Adams and his Federalist Party. It was like using a fly swatter to kill a mosquito, a massive overreaction fueled by paranoia and a dash of good old-fashioned political maneuvering. So the Alien Enemies Act was born out of political drama, but how did it play out in practice? Well, let's just say its track record is about as impressive as a lead balloon in a windstorm. Over the years, it's been dusted off and trotted out during various wars and conflicts, each time leaving a trail of controversy and injustice in its wake. During the War of 1812, it was used to round up and detain British subjects, many of whom were just regular folks trying to live their lives. Fast forward to World War I, and the act was back in action, this time targeting German immigrants. Suspicion and fear ran rampant, and thousands of people were detained or deported, often based on flimsy evidence or mere whispers of disloyalty. And then came World War II, where the Alien Enemies Act reached its shameful peak. It was used to justify the internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans, two-thirds of whom were U.S. citizens. They were ripped from their homes, businesses, and lives and forced into camps, all based on their ancestry and nothing more. It was a dark chapter in American history, a stain on the fabric of the nation and a stark reminder of what happens when fear and prejudice are allowed to trump justice and human rights. Section 5. Can the president just use this law whenever? Now you might be thinking, hold on John, does this mean the president can just use this law willy-nilly whenever they feel like it? Well, not exactly. There's a catch, and it's a big one. The Alien Enemies Act can only be used during a declared war. See, back in the good old days, declaring war was like the legal version of sending a strongly worded letter. You only did it when things were really serious. But these days, America's idea of war is about as clear as a funhouse mirror. We've got wars on drugs, wars on terror, and enough military interventions to make your head spin. This creates a bit of a conundrum. The Alien Enemies Act was designed for a time when war was a clearly defined thing, not the nebulous, ever-shifting landscape it is today. So can a president really use this law to target citizens of a country we haven't actually declared war on? That's a question that would likely end up in the Supreme Court's lap. And let's just say the justices would have their work cut out for them. It's a legal gray area, and one that highlights the need for clear guidelines and oversight when it comes to executive power, especially in times of conflict. Section 6. A law under fire, early critics speak out. Now, you might think that a law as blatantly discriminatory as the Alien Enemies Act would have been met with universal outrage and condemnation. And you'd be right. Even back in 1798, people weren't exactly thrilled about the government's new power trip. Critics of the act, including some pretty important dudes like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, saw it for what it was, a blatant attack on civil liberties and a violation of the Constitution. They argued that it gave the president way too much unchecked power and created a dangerous precedent for targeting people based on their nationality, not their actions. They pointed out that the Constitution specifically protects the right to due process, meaning you can't just lock someone up or kick them out of the country without a fair trial. They also argued that the act violated the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech and the press, as it was clearly designed to silence critics of the government. Basically, they were saying, hey government, you're not allowed to just make up laws that trample all over people's rights because you're feeling a little insecure. Section 7. A divided nation, public opinion, and the election of 1800. Now you might be thinking, okay, so some fancy-pants founding fathers were against this law, but what about everyone else? Did regular folks care? And the answer is, well, it's complicated. See, America in 1798 was about as politically divided as a family Thanksgiving dinner after someone brings up politics. The Federalists, who were all about a strong central government, were totally on board with the Alien and Sedition Acts. They saw it as a necessary measure to protect the country from foreign threats and internal dissent. But the Democratic Republicans, who favored a more decentralized government and greater individual liberties, were vehemently opposed to these laws. They saw them as a blatant power grab by the Federalists and a dangerous erosion of fundamental freedoms. This division played out in the court of public opinion, where newspapers were filled with fiery editorials, pamphlets were distributed like hotcakes, and people argued about politics with the same fervor we reserve for reality TV show finales today. The Alien and Sedition Acts became a major issue in the 1800 election, which saw Thomas Jefferson defeat incumbent John Adams in a bitterly contested race. Jefferson's victory was seen as a repudiation of the Federalist Party and their controversial laws, and the Alien and Sedition Acts were allowed to expire or were repealed. Section 8. Echoes of the Past, the Alien Enemies Act, and today's immigration debates. So, what does this dusty old law from 1798 have to do with us today? Well, more than you might think. The Alien Enemies Act might seem like a relic of a bygone era, but its legacy continues to cast a long shadow on America's immigration debates. The Act's core premise, that the government has the power to target and remove non-citizens based on their nationality or origin, is one that has resurfaced time and again throughout American history. From the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, to the Muslim travel ban proposed by the Trump administration, the impulse to restrict immigration based on fear, prejudice, and political expediency is one that America seems to struggle with. The Alien Enemies Act serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked executive power, the importance of due process and civil liberties, and the need for a more just and humane approach to immigration. Section 9. Learning from History, a call for reflection. The Alien Enemies Act isn't just some dusty old law from a bygone era. It's a cautionary tale, a reminder that the mistakes of the past have a nasty habit of repeating themselves if we're not careful. It's a story about the dangers of fear-mongering, the importance of protecting civil liberties, and the need to treat all people with dignity and respect, regardless of where they come from or what they believe. So, the next time you hear someone talking about cracking down on immigration, about banning people based on their religion or nationality, about sacrificing freedom in the name of security, remember the Alien Enemies Act. Would Trump seriously consider using the Alien Enemies Act if elected president? I guess it's left to be seen. Remember that we've been down this road before, and it doesn't lead anywhere good.